Oh, yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad that as the first session of this day of the TATRA summit, I can welcome four people who are responsible for the actual policy making at the finance ministries in this part of the world. They are deputy ministers, so they are usually people who are actually running the show while the bosses are playing politics. So
behind the scene.
So I'm really looking forward to hearing what is in the books for investment in this region, because obviously there is a lot of discussions about the investment crisis in Europe, both from the aggregate demand perspective, that we cannot grow because there is not enough demand in the system, and both from the supply side perspective, that we do not have infrastructure in place which would allow us to conduct business in an appropriate manner. I do believe that especially the latter problem is more pronounced in Visegrad countries, because our infrastructure is crumbling more and developed less than in the western part of the continent. So I do believe that the topic of investment is at the forefront of the agenda after mostly successful consolidation of public finance in our countries. But I would like to kick off this discussion with actually two questions. The first one being whether there is any space for a common V4 strategy for investment, or whether we are just looking at a set of maybe interlinked strategies, or even not even that we will be just working in a common European framework, or individually at national level. And my other question is, do we know how to pick up winners? When we start making investment, we are actually choosing projects. And are the governments, with the help of the private sector, capable of making these choices? Capable of making these choices? Can we actually do industrial policy, to use the 1960s term? Can we say which sector and which project is worthy of public or public-private financing and which one is not? Maybe Mr. State Secretary Vasil, Hudak, could you please kick off the discussion about what is feasible and what are the appropriate instruments?
Thank you. I'll try. I'll do my best. But before I go to the questions themselves, I wanted to welcome all of you, of course, at this session, and especially my colleagues from the V4 countries, because we meet quite frequently in Brussels at different sessions of deputy ministers and EFC and other fora. But actually, and it's probably a little sad that we meet as a group, as a region, we meet very seldomly. And I think that this is something that we should try to change, because we have many common issues. We face many common challenges in the region of V4, and we need to look for also common solutions. Investment is obviously the big topic of today. I think the whole TATRA summit is about how to promote investments, how to promote economic growth in the European Union. And I think it's a very healthy shift from the previous discussions, which mostly focused on consolidation. Even at our Ministry of Finance of Slovakia, when the new leadership came to power in 2012, sounds like a long time ago, but not that much. When we're thinking about, okay, what do we want to do? We agreed that we want to focus on two things. One, and this was the most immediate task, was to consolidate public finance. Slovakia was in the excessive deficit procedure. The deficit was close to 5%. The debt was also on the trend towards going up. So the main focus was on consolidation, cutting the deficit, putting the debt on a sustainable trajectory. And I can say, I think now that we have achieved basically this goal. And as you know, Slovakia exited excessive deficit procedure this year. So that's all good, but of course all the consolidation efforts would not be sufficient if they are not accompanied by growth, by the economic growth. So the investment element is very important. And from that perspective, we also welcome the initiative by the finance ministers, by the European Union, European Commission and the European Investment Bank, focused on identifying a pipeline of investment projects through the creation of so-called task force for such projects. We had very useful meeting yesterday morning here in Bratislava when we organized the first meeting of the representatives of the task force, also from the European Investment Bank and European Commission, with the representatives of private sector. And I think this is really critical for the success of this effort. Involvement of private sector is key if you want to make sure that the new investment or pro-growth strategy is to be successful. It should not be just an exercise of some bureaucrats in Brussels or in capitals. We do have to have involvement of private capital. So I think there are good ingredients of potential success. There is a lot to be done. But now going back to the two questions, and not to take too much time. First question about the V4 strategy for investment. I think we should have aspirations. We also have to be realistic. I think in a way we are, when I look at the V4 countries, I would say that we are in a kind of status of co-opetition. We on one hand we compete because we do compete for investments. We compete in different rankings of the World Bank and whatever, and we are always compared to each other from outside or from inside by the opposition parties, etc. But it's a healthy competition. I mean, you need always some kind of benchmark how to measure yourself vis-a-vis other countries. But we also are countries with many similarities. So there is a basic element of cooperation that should be there. So from that point of view, I think that there should be elements of a joint pro-investment strategy among ourselves. I don't think this will be the core of investment strategies for each country. I think the main driver for all of us are our national priorities, and we are all working on investment focus and strategies on the national level. But I think that we should identify few projects where we can work together. And these are mostly cross-border projects on the infrastructure side, whether it's energy connectivity, especially now with the situation in Russia. I think there is a lot of need for us to work closer on gas interconnection, electricity interconnections, but also other infrastructure type of projects which we can do together much better and utilize for the growth of the whole region as well as our countries. So I would say strategy or cooperation in select areas, and then picking winners. In general, I'm not I'm not in favor of picking winners. I think that winners should come through a process of giving opportunity to everybody. On the other hand, I think public sector does have a responsibility for providing an enabling environment for the businesses to grow, for investment to flourish, and this is the main role of the government to create such environment. But there are areas where governments can actually take kind of pioneering role. So, for example, in Slovakia, we are now focusing heavily on creating a strategy for the support of the startups, because we believe that we have to move on the economic side or in strategic way. We have to move towards knowledge-based economy. So we are now in the process of defining such strategy for the support of startups, creating an ecosystem for innovative economy and startup community, which would have different types of support also from the government, but would be able to flourish. So I think that these are areas where the public sector can take the lead, but otherwise it should be natural environment which should create the winners. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Orban, Hungary is known for its creative, sometimes unorthodox approaches to economic policy, which are, I would say, surprisingly effective when you look at how many influential thinkers would evaluate your efforts ex ante, then there was not much belief that they would work. And some of them, I would say, work quite effectively. So what would be your recommendations for the investment strategy, both for Hungary and for the region?
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me. Vasil, I would like to thank you personally for setting this up. I think the TATRA Summit is becoming, as many speakers before me have noted, more and more prestigious event. And it's a statement, I think, a statement on behalf of the Slovakian authorities that there is a particular Central Eastern European perspective on issues that keep European decision makers, policy makers busy. And that's why I'm really glad to see these people around this table and to be able to talk about the most important theme that it's very well chosen, investments in a V4 group. And especially because if you ask me, of course, the non-standard measures, yes, I can tell you all about them. But from a V4 perspective, those become less important, and what comes to mind, at least for me, is that we're looking for instruments and ways to promote investment when we have, at least in V4, we have found it, the best way to promote investment, and that's the EU funds themselves. If you ask us about whether any coordination is necessary or individual strategies should be preferred, my answer is a coordinated strategy is definitely necessary to preserve the one and only truly effective way of promoting investment, which is structural and cohesion funds. And there are threats to those funds from various directions. The stress in the EU budget, which was mentioned yesterday by one of the speakers, but also the tendency of core Europe to attach conditionality to the absorption of funds. A good example of a coordinated effort was last week's ECOFIN. Was it last week? Friday's ECOFIN, where the Polish minister stepped up and spoke up and said that the stress in the EU budget needs to be dealt with, and the issue of amending budgets will have to be dealt with. And colleagues around this table rallied to support him, and I think that was a perfect example of how the V4 perspective is really has its own raison d'être, its own reason for existing. It's legitimate as it is. And why do I keep repeating that it's an effective instrument? Just look at Hungary's growth numbers this year. You see that private investment grew in Q2 year on year by over 30%. That's not, it's private, not public. It's okay, there was the Daimlers and the Audis of this world building up capacity, which won't happen every year from now on, and didn't happen before. So those were a big one-off. There's also the signs of the balance sheet recession ending, and the financing, access to financing, or conditions of finance easing. But it should not be forgotten, many of the new investments came from EU funds that were absorbed in an unprecedented volume, and which gave boost to a much broader share of the economy that crowded in private sector investment as such. So this is one instrument, and one instrument that I think is the most effective of all, and where the coordinated approach is most important.
Well, Poland, when I think of Poland, obviously it's probably the most successful Central European country in the last 5 years, so congratulations. It's also the biggest, so your ambitions are wilder than the ambitions of the other countries of Central and Eastern Europe. You are not thinking about the Visegrad strategy, you are thinking about the European strategy. You even put it to words. You have a proposal for the European Investment Fund. So what is the situation with this one? Is it going to fly, or is it going to be just one of the proposals which will never see the light of the day?
Thank you for this question. Again, also thank you for the invitation. We share ownership of the Tatra Mountains, so we also feel ownership for the summit, and we think that's a great forum to discuss those challenges, also to discuss our proposal, which comes as a sort of response to your original questions. Do we need coordination action? Do we need the action at the super national level, at the European level? And for us, the answer is yes. Because the biggest threat that is facing Poland and other countries in the region, and as a region we did much better after the crisis than the rest of the EU and better than the euro area, right now is the prolonged stagnation in the euro area, which is primarily caused, as it is now confirmed by the analysis of the IMF and the European Commission and the OECD, by the slump of investment. Slump which our countries managed to avoid partly because we benefited from the EU structural funds. So actually, at least in Poland, we had strongly counter-cyclical policy which was done through the investment infrastructure, investment finance through European money. And now when we think about the ways to protect growth in our country, in our region, but also in Europe, we think that something similar needs to be done at the European level. Hence this proposal of having a European Fund for Investment, which would help to overcome the fiscal constraints faced by almost all individual member countries, and use the fiscal space which can be created at the European level by moving beyond the constraint of national fiscal rules or SGP, but to finance projects that would contribute to our joint common vision of Europe as expressed in Europe 2020, and that's Europe which is interconnected with the single market and becoming more competitive. And when you ask about picking the winners, Orban, I think, said, or Vasil about enabling environment. Infrastructure is always listed next to good regulation as the key enabling environment. So there are no really trade-offs. There's not really this dilemma, shall we pick winners or not? I mean, we need good transport connection, we need energy union, we need broadband, and all of these things can naturally be stimulated or led investment in those areas by the public state without the risk of picking the winner. And we are not talking here about crowding out private investment, but rather crowding in public investment. So that's how we see it at the European level, and then we see that there's a big need to, specific need to promote interconnectedness in our region as part of this exercise, this task force that identifies the most important European projects, because we are still lagging here behind, and that creates a special opportunity to use money wisely. and create single Europe, but then would open the way for private investment.
Thank you. Well, I will follow with a question to Mr. Prost, but you can also answer it, because obviously we do have investment needs. We do have infrastructure problems. That's obvious. There's no question about it. But I do not think that we can avoid the question of whether we can identify investments we would like to fund. Because obviously we want to have a pro-growth environment. We want to rank high in doing business. We want to have a lot of bank lending. We want to have all these neutral automatic systems in place. But in the end, what we are talking now, what we are talking about now is a change of paradigm, is setting up funds with public money in combination with private money, which will invest in specific projects. And then you actually have to decide whether a highway to Poland through northwestern part of Slovakia should be financed now or in 5 years or never. That's the decision you have to make in the end. So, well, my question to you and to Mr. Pros is, you know that Slovakia is actually on the national level pioneering this effort. We are setting up Slovak Investment Holding, which we believe will make these decisions based on basically market tests, so to say. I mean, we will calculate internal rate of return. We will try to lure private investors to co-invest with us, and this will be our solution, that we will only invest in those projects which will be able to bear this market test. So is there a place for national, regional, or European funds which will invest in specific projects based on quasi-market criteria? Well, both of you, actually, the question.
If I may start, yeah. So, good morning. And first of all, thank you very much for hosting of this session for WASIL and the Ministry of Finance. It's really important, and we really appreciate it to have a place and floor for discussions with my colleagues from other countries. And return back to your questions, when I was thinking about the topics of this session, how to make the region of Central Europe more attractive and successful. So I was thinking and remembered my experience from private business. I started my work on April, and before I have experience of 10 years in banking industry in Western Europe. And when there was any so-called dangerous regulation from EU, immediately we called to our competitors to find a common way how to negotiate with the EU and the European Commission. And so the approach has been very common and joint. And this is something which is missing in the EU level, I think, for the countries from the Central Europe. And I would like to recommend to have more these discussions and to have more common negotiations, how to support our joint activities. And we already started with colleagues from the Slovak Republic the discussion about some joint fund within the EBRD. There are funds being ended the next year, and so we would like to switch this fund to some common Czech-Slovak fund for supporting some cross-border activities and projects within the region. And this is something which is really important to us. And to your questions, what about the financial instrument, which is a resource efficiency way of deploying of funds from the EU? So we learned from the Slovak Republic, and we just started in the Czech Republic the creation of so-called Czech Investment Holding as well. Even we are at the beginning of discussions whether we should go away with EIF or to have some other structure. But I think this long-term investment is something which is key for growth of Czech economy. It helps to job creation in the Czech Republic as well, and we may, as you said, mobilize private sector and invite them to the board for investments in the Czech Republic. And in the future, we may think about other possibilities for investment across the region, maybe perhaps to create some common fund. Yeah, it's possibility as well. But the Czech Republic is not focusing only on the EU. We are trying to find some investors and to make some incentives in the opposite way. So we are going to Far East as well. So we invited the Chinese investor to the Czech Republic, and we negotiated the last week the opening of branch of Bank of China in the Czech Republic as well. So because we think the China is a country which is over liquid, and they are looking for some investment in the Central and Eastern Europe as well. So that's on my side.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Radziwill, what would be the basic principles for choosing projects in the big European investment fund? How would we do it?
So we have to remember that we do not start from the scratch. I mean, Europe has been discussing its strategic objectives and priorities for the long time. There were several initiatives which were already even collecting projects to be financed, for example, Connecting Europe facility, which is quite small, very useful, but the initiative which is of a limited size, small size compared to the needs. So we actually have the pipeline. So when we are in the exercise of preparing projects, for example, as Poland for this task force, we do not start just running around the country looking for the new ideas. Actually, there are many projects which are already put on the list of project strategic importance for the country, submitted to different European funding mechanism or national funding mechanism, but the financing was simply not available. So we have these broad areas when we all agreed are important, which is especially energy, transport, digital economy. We have this pipeline already of projects which have not been financed. So we have it already. Then you ask this question, and that's a good question, that there are surely some dilemmas involved in picking the winners, because money is always limited and the needs are huge. So let me first, a short comment on this. Where we see that actual challenge, and that's something that you mentioned when you set up your own national fund, is that, as it was discussed yesterday among private sector participants, there's a small number of good projects, they call it. What we understand they mean, the private sector means, is bankable projects. Projects which have well-defined cash flow going forward, internal rate of return, not the return on investment not counted in decades, but rather in years, with risks which are manageable, which are not external, these are not regulation and things like this. And there are many projects which are almost bankable. So if you provide a little bit of support of public equity to these projects, you can mobilize those projects and make them attractive by private sector. So you get the big leverage. So that's good. You get very good press. But there are also projects which are extremely important that you cannot really hope to leverage much. For example, anti-flood protection, which is in our region often cross-border projects of a huge importance, but how much of a private sector involvement you can actually expect? And should you prioritize those projects when you can actually leverage with the private money on the project level? And we are not so sure whether the fund that we propose to establish, which would mobilize private saving by borrowing in the financial market and then using money strategically according to the assessment of the needs, and not only on primarily on the question how much of the private sector can be attracted to this specific project. But still, the decision has to be made, and for us, the question is about clear rules and governance. So apart from this choice, we have strategic sectors. We have the team of experienced project managers coming from institutions such as European Investment Bank, European Investment Fund, and other places where such expertise exists, with the governance which is well established, where member countries are well represented. They approve such projects the way it is done on the board of European Investment Bank, for example. But we say that projects should also be front-loaded in countries which are in the biggest cyclical slump. Just because we know that the multipliers would be biggest there, and we can actually make the most difference there at the current moment. But we talk about front-loading, not that we do projects only there, but we should pay particular attention. And also we say that actually in case of this instrument, structural conditionality should be part of the equation, because we know that administrative burden, bad regulation is also often a barrier to investment. So Europe providing this additional big source of funding can also leverage structural reforms. So that's more or less the idea we have in mind.
Well, thank you very much for a clear answer, because from what I hear is you do not want governments or supra-governments playing venture capitalists in the private market. You do want to invest in public goods, and you want to develop projects which would not be bankable, which I believe is a sound strategy. But still, I mean, it's very difficult not to create white elephants along the road to fund projects which will have no customers in the end. And anti-flooding protection is probably not the best example. Some of the airports all around the world which do not have any passengers are probably a better one. Thank you very much. I will move on to another question. When you look at the recent economic history of the region, there were basically two sources of financing investment. One of them was FDI, so really private money going into industry. And it was a huge success across all four of our countries. The other one was European funds. And on this account, I believe the picture is more mixed. Some of the countries, for example, Poland, was able to use it more effectively. Some of the other countries, I'm not going to mention anyone, less effectively. It doesn't matter. We will have to rely on both sources of funding. We will have very little domestic private sources of financing investment. So my question to all four of you is, should we rely more on EU funds, maybe used in a creative way, as in Slovak Investment Holding, or should we focus more on attracting FDIs? And I know that all of you will tell me that both are important, so I want you to tell me which one is more important in your view. For example, Mr. Pross.
Yeah, thank you for the floor. So as I already confirmed, in the Czech Republic, we prefer the way of establishing of some Czech stakeholding. So we would like to go through the way of financial instruments. So by the way of repayable instruments, because you may mobilize the private sector, as I already said, and you may recycling this fund, so which is it's really useful. But we are at the beginning of the way, and I know in the Slovak Republic you created this fund more than 7 years. So I think it will be very hard way, because we are facing, as you, the politicians in the Czech Republic, who are thinking in the horizon of 4 years of electoral period. So we need to try to explain the reasons of establishing these long-term investment instruments in the Czech Republic. But to answer to your questions, the financial instruments funding from the EU is our preferred way. But I cannot share the experience how to handle EU grants because it's a very horrible story in the Czech Republic. So we are at the end of the list of countries. Yeah, I think so. So my congratulations to Poland. And so we are learning, and I hope with this financial holding, we will be much more successful in the future.
Thank you. Basil, so how do we catch up with Austria? Through Slovak Investment Holding or 10 new Volkswagens coming in?
It is a mixture, obviously, as you said. It's an easy answer. But I think that, and I'm looking at this from the Slovak perspective, which is obviously specific and unfortunately, unlike Poland, or in the recent months or 1-2 years, Hungary, where you really managed to speed up the utilization of the EU funds. Slovakia is very much behind, and I think here we share with the Czech friends the same frustrations. I think when it comes to FDI, I believe the kind of happy time of big FDI inflows is over. This is partly because much of the FDI was driven by privatization. We don't have much to privatize anymore. Also, I think that we should be much more selective in what kind of FDI we want. I think that we should focus on those foreign investors who bring added value, especially in terms of the type of investments they make. As I mentioned, we want to focus heavily on knowledge economy, and we would focus from that perspective. We would welcome more investors of this type who can bring this type of added value to the economy. I think from the immediate perspective and future, the better utilization of EU funds is our best opportunity. This is kind of free money. It's there. It's for us, for Slovakia, and it's only up to us to really utilize it in the full manner. So Slovak Investment Holding is one piece of the mosaic, but this is a small piece. It's only 3% of the overall allocation of the funds. What we need to do is to just be better in managing EU funds. We know many deficiencies that we have. I don't want to go into details here, but we can also learn from Poland, from Hungary, from Baltic states who are using funds at over 80%. We are close to 60 only. So there is a lot we can learn. But I want to also touch upon another issue, which is the question whether what is really more important. We may say both, but is it money or is it projects? Because when we are talking about investments, the fact is that in the global world, and actually all four of us, which is really funny, but we all come from business business background and from private sector. I think we can see that there is there is overflow of liquidity. There is enough money, probably too much money globally, which is looking for the right investments. So I think the issue is really to identify the projects which have the ability to attract this investment. And this is now the biggest task. Actually, when we had yesterday discussion in the morning of this task force on investment, and there were many bankers from Erste, Deutsche to JP Morgans and Citis and Goldman Sachs, etc. They all agreed that the money is there. It's really the issue of identifying the right projects, bankable projects to be financed. So I think that this is our task, and where also the public money can help is exactly to create or to help to bring these bankable projects into fruition and to attract, to crowd in the private sector.
If I may add something on the picking of winners question, I think this is a serious one, and not just because governments tend to be not very good at allocating capital or identifying viable projects. It's also about why there is low investment everywhere, almost everywhere. And if you look at someone mentioned the World Economic Outlook yesterday. If you look at the economies or economic zones in the world that are growing, you'll find that it's the US, the UK, and Turkey. What do they have in common? They have much less of an issue with the aging population than most of us around the table, or the Eurozone, or Japan, or China even, or Russia. In a situation where you have an aging population, you will tend to have low saving and low investment, just simply because of the textbook economics. Now, in a scenario like that, pressing to find projects will be very difficult, and the risk of misallocating resources will be high, because in an aging population, you don't really need to invest that much as in one that is that has a younger age structure. And coming back to what Vasil has said about FDI, I think part of the reason there is low FDI and low investment across the regions and economic zones is precisely this. That's one reason why FDI is only partially an answer, or that there are limits to what extent FDI can solve our problems. For example, in Hungary, we've learned this lesson the hard way, but attracting FDI into sectors that you will later fail to regulate will create political problems. Attracting FDI into sectors where the technology transfer or the governance value added from the point of view of corporate governance is not there, doesn't make any sense. It's not a productive FDI. So in certain sectors, in certain parts of the economy, especially in industry and parts of the economy that produce to sell outside the borders, FDI, especially if it's greenfield, makes a lot of sense. But this is a narrow scope relatively. For all the rest, the answer is the EU funds, the more efficient, faster use of the absorption of the EU funds.
Actually, this is, I would say, a pretty crucial question, because when you look at Slovak unemployment levels, which are close to 14%, and you try to find reasons for them, one of the top three is that we lack capital. This is, it's a straightforward story. It's not about labor regulation, it's not about discrimination. We do lack capital. Compared to Czech Republic, we have only half of the capital stock per capita than the Czech Republic has. Correcting for this one, I would say, because Basil made an interesting remark about the FDI era. I'm not so sure. I don't know whether we can actually get so much public capital coming in, even just the basic numbers to Slovakia to correct for this huge asymmetry. Situation is probably different in Hungary and Czech Republic, and it's similar to Slovak Republic in Poland. So Mr. Radziwill, what would you say?
So I just wanted to really follow what Vasil and Gabor were saying. FDI are extremely important, and we have to always remember they do not only bring money, but they also bring know-how, technologies, all these things that we still very much need in the region. However, when we receive FDIs, it means that we receive a piece of a cake of the total investment done in Europe, and this cake shrunk very substantially, and we don't see it grow. And therefore, it's very difficult to expect any revival of FDIs unless we see some revival of investment at the European level. And there's demographic challenge, and this very long-term challenge, but also in the short to medium term, there's not much appetite to invest in new production capacities at the European level if you don't see a prospect of actually increasing demand. So that's sort of our logic when we want to fix Europe, or especially fix Euro area, in parallel to getting our economic structure better in Poland. So we see the big public investment program at the European level as a key element of true growth strategy in Europe that would increase the pie of investment, and then we receive more of it. Because Germany's and Euro area, and especially Germany, is our key partner. If Germany is stagnating, I mean, why would we expect much more investment in the production facilities in our countries? We can expect a little bit of continuation of shifting of the production, but there is a limit to this. Also, our labor costs are growing relative to those in the West, but also there's a political backlash against it, and our priority is to contribute to the growth strategies at the European level.
So it's a macro problem, in other words, rather than a micro problem.
May I just simply comment? My role here is a bit odd. I should comment on things which have been said. And in such a distinguished group of ministers, I feel almost a bit embarrassed to do so. But nevertheless, I guess very important statements have been made, and representing here a European institution, the European Investment Fund, we have, over the last 20 years, had the pleasure to work with a lot of EU funds, including structural funds. And I would just make a couple of comments. One is, and that's a very important statement, while structural funds might come for free if you price them for free, they never come for free, because you have somebody who has to realize a project, be it a bank, be it a construction company, whoever. And this somebody has to comply with a clear set of rules, or often not that clear. And that means reporting, monitoring, auditing, etc., etc. At the end of the day, trying to make a product around a fairly narrow designed regulation. So therefore, the product does not come for free. I just like to state this because I see this in the implementation, how difficult it is also for banks who really want that. And when I listened to Mr. Stepic yesterday, it's all about capital, it's all about risk provision. Indeed, these funds can do that. But what the Stepic of this world must do, they have to design a product, they have to motivate the salespeople out there to sell these products, be able to report, to monitor, and receive from Court of Auditors all the way down to audit authorities, any moment auditors. So it does not come for free. So therefore, the partnership is all about a common understanding how to implement this. This is one statement. The other statement I like to make, the regulation in the structural funds indeed has improved. It's not perfect, it has improved, and it gives us a much better base to work upon it. Nevertheless, and this is a bit frustrating when I listen to the four ministers, but I've also had the pleasure to listen to others on the same topics. When I read the draft strategies and when I read the draft operational programs in Brussels, which came from the member states, it's almost like back in school, it's a copy-paste. And instead of really creating this strategy, which you're talking about, breaking the ice, going beyond it, and stimulate these cross-regional activities, I haven't seen a single reference to this. But it's now the time to do so. And I guess, again, if this forum helps us to encourage us, to empower us, to go out and potentially change this and make these voices heard, I would think this is the right moment to do so. Indeed, as the EIF, we are managing also central mandates, i.e. mandates which are distributed over the 28 member states and other states which participate, like for instance under Cosme Horizon, Turkey, etc. We see the advantages of those centrally managed mandates, so therefore having a vehicle, although I would like to say you already have it, right? The European Investment Bank is your fund, the European Investment Fund is indirectly via the bank your fund. I guess it's the whole question how we align the strategies. One thing which I also would like to bring into this debate, and in particular in this region, it was stressed yesterday slightly, how the importance of SMEs in the region when it comes to employment. It's about 70%, which is much more than in the rest of Europe. In this region, again, we have a very low R&D expenditure, about 1% of GDP, which is half of the Western Balkan, of the west of Europe. We have a highly educated young people, but where do they work and live? They work and live with me in Luxembourg, they live and work in London. Bring them back. What can we do in order to bring them back? It's all about, as far as I'm concerned, it's about entrepreneurship and innovation, and I haven't heard this yet. We have to put this on the agenda. This is critical for me. It's not only about building other roads, although flooding is important, but in order to motivate people to come back from London to Bucharest, to Sofia, to Budapest, wherever, you have to give them opportunity. I'll give you a small example. Under the Jeremy in Bulgaria, we have done a seed and accelerator fund. We have committed to two fund managers 20 million euro, only 20 million euro. These people cannot make a living off the 20 million euro as management fees. What they have done is, so far after 2 years, we have seen 150 seeded company. Almost half of them went in the second and third capital round, not on cash basis, but on book values. We have already tripled the 20 million which we have earmarked, or invested 7 million. There is enormous opportunities if you allow the opportunities to grow. I hear and see university to grow, research center to grow. Why not coupling them together with tech transfer funds in between, as we do it in the UK? There's so many good ideas, but please, put them down on paper and force the Commission to approve it, and then we do it. This is my only remark. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I will give you the floor to summarize the whole discussion. But before doing that, just my two summarizing remark, which will be based off my last round of questions, which is, it seems to me that all four of us are in favor of using public money to support investment, both at the national level and probably at the European level. I do not feel that much support for any kind of fund at the regional Visegrad level because of redundancy, competition, whatever. But it looks like we might be in a public fund at the national level and maybe at the European level. So my question is, what is the time frame for both projects in your mind? How fast it should and could be up and running, and how much money would you be willing to commit, both at the national level and at the European level, both national money and European money? Basil. Sorry, I mean, it's a tough one, I know. I'm pushing.
I'm not sure you will get your bonus for this year.
If I keep my job, it's okay.
But before I go to the questions, I just want to react to what Hubert said, because he made some very important comments. And I think our discussion so far was maybe too much skewed towards infrastructure and big projects and these type of issues, which are important because they, as Arthur mentioned, they do create the environment in which the smaller businesses, the innovative industries, etc., can flourish. I mean, we need to create that, and at least in Slovakia, we feel that this is something we are really lacking. The infrastructure in terms of transport, we have pockets of unemployment, mostly, as you know, in southeastern Slovakia, while we have not enough qualified people in western. We need to connect the country. We need to also connect north-south. We need to interconnect Slovakia better with our neighbors, with Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland. We have to also bring Ukraine much closer to V4, because I think it is our responsibility to help the country, but also to integrate Ukraine towards Europe. So there are these infrastructure elements, which also include infrastructure of more maybe sophisticated nature, like broadband and so on. But I think it doesn't mean that we are not paying attention to entrepreneurship, innovation, etc. I mentioned that we are, at least in Slovakia, we are in the process of finalizing a strategy for the support of startups. We have a kind of multi-layered approach to how to promote this innovative area and how to give young people opportunities to start their businesses, to get support from public and private sources, etc., etc., and how to bring young people from outside, because, as you said, many of them left, and we need to do that. And we are also thinking in the V4 context. We will have informal lunch after this session, but there were already some discussions yesterday and previously, and we are, for example, thinking about creating a kind of V4 innovation task force, so that we can connect and combine our forces also in this area. We are thinking about maybe creating a V4, so-called V4 house in Silicon Valley, where young entrepreneurs, so-called startup guys or girls, can go and actually learn and connect with the US counterparts. So there are these activities that are quite new, still nascent, but I think there are good beginnings of something we can do together also in this area. Now going to the question of the public funds, national versus European. Again, I think we have to move simultaneously on both levels, and as we already heard, we have Slovak Investment Holding. In Czech Republic, similar institution is being created. I know in Poland you have, although not utilizing EU funds, but more proceeds from privatization. We have national development banks. So we have different instruments which are designed to really kind of push the investments forward on the national level, and those will be certainly supported. Now on the European level, we have this process of identifying the pipeline of the investment project, which I think is very good. But at the same time, we have created a lot of expectations. Even in Slovakia, we have now approached different ministries. We have gone to private sector, etc. We have basically put together a pipeline of over 150 projects, and now we basically said it has to be a project above 100 million euro, and the project has to be started no later than in 2 years. So it's quite tough criteria, and still, even in a relatively small economy, we were able to identify projects of the total value of around 20 billion euro. Now, I can imagine then in bigger economies, like Poland, it has to be multiples of this amount, not even talking about France or Italy, etc. So all these projects now will be channeled to Brussels and to Luxembourg because of European Investment Bank. And I think the question will be, so what? How do we proceed with this? And so we create the expectations, and there is also when you create a lot of expectations, there is a danger of disappointment, of course, and frustrations. But I think we cannot miss this project because we have maybe one of the last opportunities to create excitement in Europe, that Europe can grow, it can invest, it can go forward, and it can have better future for its people. So this is a big question: how do we handle these projects? I think some of the projects will have to be financed on the national level, some from the EU funds, some from existing resources. We have the Connecting Europe facility, etc. We have other sources. But eventually we need some winners, as you said. We need something, some flagship projects where we can say in very near future that, look, this is something we are doing together with private sector, ideally also on a cross-border level, and these are European projects of European importance, and we are going to do it as Europeans. And here, you mentioned China, and I think also Martin, and yesterday in our discussion of this task force on investments, Mr. Treichel from Erste, he said, we should be something like Chinese. And I think what he meant was that, okay, we are generating this project and project ideas kind of bottom up. It's like a pyramid scheme. It's a very broad, big base, big pipeline of projects, but somehow it has to go up to something that is manageable and bankable, and the private sector can participate. So at some point there has to be some decision making together with private sector and public sector representatives to decide, okay, what are these flagship projects we want to do and show that we can do it. I think here this process has to go ahead. At the same time, I think it is worthwhile to think through some innovative ideas. I think the Polish idea of the European Investment Fund of 700 billion volume is very interesting, and worthwhile to consider. My minister suggested yesterday that maybe we should look into the possibility of having ECB buying the bonds issued by European Investment Bank, which would increase the power, investment power of the European Investment Bank, and at the same time would give an opportunity to ECB to invest the assets or into the assets which are of high quality. So I think it would make a lot of sense for Europe to do something like this. So there are different maybe options, and we need to, in parallel, as we are identifying the projects, focusing on flagship projects which show that we have the ability in Europe to do something together. At the same time, I think we should, in parallel, identify or explore other ways how we mobilize European sources for this type of investments.
As I said, it will be a tough question about time and money. So, when do you foresee the first Slovak investment holding projects will be kicked off, and how much money can we actually invest within the first year?
Well, we are already
Just to give an idea to the audience.
So-
I know the by accident I know the answer,
Yes.
but
well, we are already exploring projects where the Slovak investment holding can get engaged. The most kind of obvious and known, at least in Slovakia, are the two PPP projects focused on highway infrastructure, the so-called D4 and R7 projects, which are in quite advanced stage of development. So these will be the two most obvious and most immediate areas where Slovak investment holding would co-invest with other private sector investors, and where engagement of Slovak investment holding would actually significantly decrease the cost of financing for such projects. But there are other projects which are also under development, such as a first PPP hospital in Bratislava, even a prison based on PPP principles. So these are mostly the projects which are public-private partnership projects where we are already now exploring engagement, and I think we are talking about latest next year, mid next year, 2015, when the first investments will happen.
Mr. Pross, you are engaged in a similar process, but you are in an earlier stage. So what is your take at the national level? When you can have the fund up and running and investing, and how much money would you like to commit?
That's my advantage, that I cannot answer to your questions. How much money we would like to invest into this holding, because we are at the beginning of discussions. As I said, we try to identify what will be the best way how to implement financial instruments within the Czech Republic. So whether to go through the way of European Investment Fund or to create the Czech state holding. So for the moment and time being, I cannot answer how much we would like to invest into this holding. But in any case, regarding time framework, we would like to do in 4 years, so before the next election.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Radziwill, we know the figure for the European proposal. What is the time frame?
Yeah, I'm the lucky one because I have all the numbers ready. So about the time frame, it's how Vizal mentioned that the projects are supposed to be the ones that can be started within next few years, so until the end of 2017, I believe. That's the mandate of the task force. Thinking about the timing process-wise, and I will tell you how I see the process. So after we had the discussion at ECOFIN back in September about this proposal and other proposal to stimulate investment in Europe, there was the question, are we, Mr. now President Juncker says 300 billion, we say 700 billion, other projects out there. And that was the reason why the task force was created, to see bottom up other projects worth doing. But even now at this early stage of the work of the task force, we see that we will see numbers probably in trillions being submitted by member countries. As you rightly said, Slovakia can come up with 20 billion, Poland would probably come with 200 billion, British already suggested something bigger than Poland. So it would be huge numbers. So after this work is done, there will be ECOFIN in December. And actually there were lots of commitments that good projects will be financed. So, unlike others who say that, you know, we should be careful of expectations, I think we should create expectation and actually put pressure on ourselves that we will deliver. Because Europe needs it, European business needs it, and European citizens need it, otherwise they vote the way they voted in European Parliament elections and in other elections that are happening now in different countries. Basically voting against Europe because they are disappointed with results. But then the question is, and by the way, we talk with people working with President Juncker, and they will come up with their own specific proposal even before the ECOFIN in the beginning of December. So very soon we will see what's on the table, and there's the need to make political decisions. And then about the money. So with 700 billion, it's 5.5% of European GDP. So these are huge amounts of money. So how all of us would need to contribute to make this project happen, and actually this is not much. For Poland, the budgetary cost of the scheme would be, because actually we calculate for all countries, and it's similar for all countries, for Poland would be 0.02% of GDP, which means that is 1/50th of the percentage point of the GDP. So it really is easily, can be easily financed under strict national fiscal rules and under SGP. In fact, this preserves SGP while promotes investment in Europe. So that's how much we want to invest, and that's what we confirmed to President Juncker day before yesterday when we discussed it with him.
So what are the plans of the Hungarian government?
We've
Specific ones.
had the investment funds that the Czech Republic is about to set up that Vasil has mentioned for some time under the control of the Development Bank. It's a much more fragmented structure than these two other examples, but this is supposed to be streamlined a little bit and used to channel the refundable parts of the EU funds into the economy in the form of guarantees, in the form of private equity funds, form of direct equity injections. Some of you have said there's an equity shortage in our economies. This is and yesterday it was mentioned that there's a risk-bearing capacity problem, that we might have the money, but we don't have the courage to spend it. Someone has to have the courage to spend that money, and government cannot be that because the government's facing fiscal constraints. The banks are unable to take risks because of their capital issues and the regulation that is tightening. Households need to deleverage, corporate sector lacks equity, so we really need someone who has the ability, repeating myself, the courage to spend the money that's otherwise available. And that's what I like about the Polish proposal, that it overcomes the fiscal constraint. At the same time, as mentioned by Arthur, as a underlying intention to further deepen the single market by these projects. So it makes a lot of sense. I have a feeling that politically this is not yet fully supported, unfortunately, by all sides. But to me, it seems that this is the way forward.
Thank you, Mr. Cortoni. What would be your summing up of the discussion here, especially of the practical and financial aspects? Because in the end, you will have to we will have to administer at least part of the strategy in the end.
Indeed, I guess Juncker somehow surprised us all, but in a positive manner, that he said, now we have to do something for investments in Europe. 300 billion is out there as a landmark. And the big question is, what do we do under this? Indeed, the EIB and the EIF is engaging in a series of working groups to contribute ideas and concepts to make, to put meat around the bone. And indeed, a lot of things which have been said today are being discussed as we speak. Certainly the role of the national public institutions will increase within this concept, because on one hand, they are much closer to the market. They are in the midst of the market. They can potentially also channel money from governments into such structures. Such structures, indeed, as has been said, not only that you can move out of certain national constraints like the tax regimes, etc., but as we see in our case, for instance, where we manage multi-regional layered fund of funds, where we have the first loss, so to speak, the equity part covered by structural funds or similar funding. These funds, I just give you a couple of examples. For instance, EFSI, the microfinance fund, which we manage in the Eastern neighborhood and the Western Balkan and Turkey. It's the largest microfinance fund worldwide. And why that? Because it has a nice layer of first cushion, and then it was able to attract other IFIs like the EBRD, the EIB, IFC, FMO, but last not least, an enormous number of private investors. And that is exactly the advantage of these structures, because if you outsource the management and therefore have a clear, transparent corporate governance of such structure, also the decision making will be in a transparent manner, and as Mr. Orban said, must not be done by somebody who might be hesitant to do so because he might have a political responsibility surrounding that. So I'm strongly in favor of moving in this direction, because on one hand it would neutralize the decision making. It would indeed pick the winners by the outset, because the procurement procedure would look at the capability of the management, the soundness of the project, the bankability or the ability to raise funding for such projects. And at the same time, the structure itself, given its corporate governance, will be able to fundraise in the private market. And you would have, in such a way, a typical PPP, which indeed can easily focus on both areas, infrastructure investments as well as entrepreneurship and innovation, which is very close to my heart. As the EIF, what we are proposing right now in the region is to do something for the equity gap. We are proposing a regional fund of fund, which would be covering early stage up to the growth stage in the area, and to attract teams and thereby really creating the venture capital ecosystem. So far, the talks are positive, but it is all to be weighted within the bigger picture of Juncker, and we are all, I guess, looking forward to December when he is going to announce a more concrete plan around it. At the same time, and I guess that's something it's again very close to my heart, as we depend so much on banking in Europe, we do not have a common understanding in Europe as regards capital relief structures. I'm talking about credit guarantee schemes in Europe. That's something which is really burning. We have to have it. Thanks God, in Slovakia, for instance, where we have rolled out these portfolio guarantees, the Slovak authorities were forthcoming and provide this capital relief to the banks. But what I would wish is that Europe takes a common decision and recommendation as regards guarantees as a support for lending to banks, in respect not only to provide risk coverage, but also to provide capital relief. That is an untapped area, and you see countries like Italy, they couldn't work without the guarantee schemes. In this region here, we have a very diversified, fragmented guarantee schemes. Often it doesn't work, but in particular I see a lack of regulators to interpret this in a positive manner in order to support and stimulate bank lending to projects, be it infrastructure as well as SME support. so that is something which is critical. But I guess the direction goes in the right direction. I hope the TATRA Forum continues to be what it proved to be, because it's one of the fora where I see people speak less under the protocol. They are able to speak up, and therefore the best ideas come out. And I'm again thankful for being invited.
Well, thank you for being with us. I think we have space for 2 questions from the audience. So please.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much, Mario Nicolini from the Central European Strategy Council. I would, if you allow me, make use of the presence of senior finance minister officials from the region in order to ask about TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. It has its strong enthusiasts, it has its critics, and it has an awareness issue. Especially on the other side of Atlantic, it's simply not high on the political agenda. So what's in it for the region, and are we prepared to make a strong case for it when the time comes? Thank you.
Well, I can start. It's a really, I mean, it's a global issue, global topic, but very important because eventually it boils down to the specific countries and members of the European Union. The way we look at this from the Slovak perspective is that anything that helps with trade and connected to this with economic growth within European context is good for us as well. We are very much, as you know, open economy. 85% of our GDP comes from exports, and 80% out of this 85 is connected to the European Union. So we are really dependent on how our European environment behaves. And from that perspective, we see the Transatlantic Treaty as a good step, as something that will open up new opportunities for trade, that will bring more economic development to the region. At the same time, obviously, there are some sectors where we are probably more sensitive in terms of the potential impact. I know that agriculture is one of those. We are also exploring ways how this treaty is going to impact on some of the bilateral investment treaties which are currently between the member states and the United States, and which will shift to the EU versus United States, and will have an impact on some of the arbitrages, for example, that Slovak government has with some players who are connected to the United States. But overall, strong support, and we believe this is the right way for Europe to go.
Listening to Basil, this seems again like an area where V4 coordination would probably be would probably make sense, because I would repeat the same remarks. Hungary is a proud and optimistic and confident country, so we welcome every opportunity that opens up by dismantling of barriers. Our politicians think that we can only gain by more competition worldwide, because we think we are competitive. Otherwise, I have to add that the discussions and the negotiation is taking place in a relatively intransparent manner. So it's unclear to member states what exactly the discussions, what stage exactly the discussions are at. So that's why I can only give you a relatively vague answer on the specific subjects. But the two that I would also highlight are the agriculture issue, the GMO issue in particular, and second, the investment protection schemes. We have to be careful there.
I think this question and our response are good illustration of our strengths and weaknesses. I mean, strength is that I think we speak with the same voice, and weakness comes that we don't need to formally coordinate so much, because we are on the same page anyway, so I'll just not say anything. I agree fully what both Basil and Urban said, and that's a Polish position as well.
I may confirm.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, Visegrad consensus, at least in one topic. Is there? Oh, please.
Good morning. Denis Ivanov from International Investment Bank. Thank you so much for this interesting discussion. So we have heard about two major components of investments. One is EU funds, and we very much welcome the innovative instruments to use these funds by the Slovak Republic, plans of the Czech Republic, other countries. The second component was the FDI, but somehow the role of domestic investors in providing long-term finance to projects was not really emphasized. While in some countries, pension insurance funds, they play quite an important role in providing long-term investments to projects. So I wonder whether in the V4 countries there are plans on behalf of the governments to further mobilize domestic investments as well.
Poland has most
Biggest
experience
market,
in this
biggest
area.
market.
Pension fund and domestic investors.
So that's a very interesting question. I mean, we repeat forever, and we still believe that we should mobilize domestic savings and domestic sources of funding. We repeat it, but we have to remember that, for example, current account, Poland was traditionally in deficit, quite substantial deficit. We are almost in balance now. So we used to import savings from abroad. Now it's less true, more recent. And if we look at Europe in general, the current problem is we have lots of savings, we have very little investment. So now I think our priorities changed slightly, so it is less about mobilization of domestic savings, but it is about identification and removing barriers for domestic investments. And then the origin of the funding is of the secondary importance.
Maybe I can, from a little different perspective, because I think this is also an area where V4 can do much more together. And this is, it boils down to the fact that all our economies are export-driven. Maybe less for Poland because you have strong domestic market, but still we are very much export-oriented economies. And I think that there is a potential how we can better utilize our capacities in this area. For example, I know of some companies in Czech Republic or Hungary, certainly in Poland, which are really kind of regional players and can be kind of EPC contractors for big projects, whether it's in China or whether it's in Latin America, wherever, where you really need big solid companies who can put together major projects, but then they need suppliers, and this is where we can work together on a kind of cross-border level, so that these regional players are kind of icebreakers, you know, who go forward and structure the big projects abroad, can then pull in suppliers from our V4 countries. And I think there is more potential we can utilize in this area. And this could be underpinned by a closer cooperation among the export-import banks in our countries. We already have good cooperation, especially with Czech Export Bank. Actually, the International Investment Bank has done very useful exercise where they brought together some of these export-import agencies and export guarantee agencies and created a kind of network. But I think we can do much more on the V4 basis, that we can kind of better coordinate activities of these agencies to support these kind of regional players and really pull together the resources we have as a region to become much more active on the export side.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming here. It was very interesting, and I think there is time for break now.
Thank you.
Thank you.